All right, class. So I have figured this out. So on this slide, we are still on the Old Kingdom, but we just have two more items until we're in the New Kingdom, or I'm sorry, the Middle Kingdom, then the New Kingdom. So this sculpture is called Seated Scribe. We don't know for sure who it is of, but it was found in the tomb of Kai. So in Egyptian society, a high-ranking scribe copied, compiled, studied, and repaired valuable sacred texts and scientific texts. These complicated works were placed in institutions which functioned as some of the earliest known libraries. Um, and as we saw with kings, they're depicted as more idealized, more perfect, like physical specimens. Less prominent people are rendered more lifelike in ancient Egypt, as you can see with this man. The figure is dressed in a white kilt stretched to its knees. It's holding a half-rolled papyrus. Perhaps the most striking part of the figure is its face. Its realistic features stand out in contrast to the rigid and somewhat less detailed body. The hands, fingers, and fingernails of the sculpture are delicately modeled, as well as his face, but the rest of him is a little bit more bland. Um, Special attention was devoted to the eyes of the sculpture. They are modeled in rich detail out of pieces of red-veined white magnesite, which are elaborately inlaid with pieces of polished, truncated rock crystal, which is why they literally look living. They are actually shiny because they are made of crystal. The backside of the crystal was covered with a layer of organic material, which at the same time gave the blue color to the iris and served as an adhesive. So there's two copper clips holding each eye in place. The eyebrows are marked with fine lines of dark organic paint, so probably charcoal or coal. The scribe, though his body is not in as much detail, he still has some sort of personality. He's a little fleshy, he's a little overweight, but this suggests that he's pretty well off and he doesn't need to do any sort of physical labor. He sits cross-legged. It would have been his normal position at work. His face is alert and attentive, like he's like, please say the next thing that I need to write down for you. He has already made papyrus, so the way that scrolls work is that you would unravel the part that you're writing on, and then once it's dry, you would roll that part up and unroll the next part. So he's already started work on something else, or something that he's writing. He's waiting for you to start your next paragraph or sentence. So the identity of the person remains unknown. The semicircular base of the sculpture suggests that it was originally fitted in a larger piece of rock, which presumably carried its name and title. This somewhat unusual pose was, it seems, reserved for members of the immediate royal family, although not for the king himself. So he probably worked in a royal, if it depicts a real person, he was probably a royal scribe, meaning he worked for the royal family, not that he was royal himself. It was made around 2450 to 2325 BCE. It was discovered near a tomb made for an official named Kai and is sculpted from limestone. Many pharaohs and high-ranking officials would have had their servants depicted in some sort of image or sculpture so that they went into the afterlife with them and could use their skills. So it's interesting. We think of Mesopotamia, they actually killed their servants. And in Egypt, they instead made likenesses of them that they believed would carry their specific skills. So when they died, they would have their scribe still with them to write down everything that they needed to be written down. Scribes were used for a multitude of things involving everyday Egyptian life and would be tax collectors or in charge of organizing personnel for activities such as mining, trade, and war. They were also used to work on projects like pyramids and communicated between the rulers and the Egyptian people. So they were very vital people of interest. They weren't political figures, but they verbalized the political happenings of the time. And then this work is our last work that we're going to look at from the Old Kingdom. This is a painted limestone relief, and it decorates the walls of mastabas from the 5th dynasty of an official named T. He, Old Kingdom patrons preferred adornment of their final resting places to be very colorful, like many ancient peoples. And depictions of agriculture and hunting were very popular. So he is watching a hippopotamus hunt. He's not taking part, but he's watching one. And Egyptians associated these activities with the provisioning of the Ka in the hereafter. So basically giving the Ka entertainment. And it's also subjects that have very powerful overtones. In this relief, T, who is the large man, that doesn't mean necessarily that he was an important person. When we think of hieratic scale, he probably was an important official, but it's more so that he is the one that this tomb is the subject of. He is the dead person that is housed within the tomb. Therefore, he should be bigger than everybody else because it's all about him. So T is with his men, and they're on boats, slowly going through marshes on the Nile River. And they're in a dense growth of towering papyrus. So this is all papyrus. It's not trees or just some random lines that they decided. It's supposed to be that they are in tall papyrus reeds, and they're going through trying to find hippopotamus to hunt and kill. The sculptor delineated the reeds with these very fine grooves that fan out gracefully at the top, as you can see with the lotus plant, or with the papyrus plant. The water beneath the boat actually has wavy horizontal, vertical lines, and at the top are birds, and you can actually see foxes on reeds that are kind of bent down a little bit, and they're hunting the birds. So the foxes are technically, in their belief, superior to the birds, and they're hunting them. And the humans are technically superior to the hippopotami, and they are hunting the hippopotamus, whatever you want to call it. So the water is very crowded. It has hippopotami. Here's a baby, dang. Here's a mama. Here is another hippopotami, and here's our hippopotamus, and here's another hippopotamus. And then there's a bunch of fish all around. The men are frantically busy with their spears, whereas T is depicted very aloof and calm and like, this is fine. We're all going to be okay. He suggests that he is not an actor in the hunt because he doesn't do anything. He simply is just there as an impassive observer of life, like his Ka is. So, yeah. yeah, it's just very interesting. Also, hippopotami are very dangerous animals. So yes, you want to be if you're going to kill them, I wouldn't recommend it. But if you're going to kill them, you need to do it fast because they will fight back. Okay. So now we are on to the Middle Kingdom. Woohoo! So the collapse of the Old Kingdom was followed by around 150 years of political turmoil, referred to as the First Intermediate Period, where there's records, but we don't talk about it so much because we just don't talk about it. We talk about it because we're going to talk about it right now. So the Middle Kingdom designates a period of ancient Egyptian civilization stretching from approximately 2030 BCE to 1650 BCE. So in its dynasties 11 through 13. During this era, the cultural principles set out at the beginning of Egyptian civilization and codified during the Old Kingdom were reimagined, including the ideology of kingship, the organization of society, religious practices, afterlife beliefs, and relations with neighboring peoples. So these transformations are attested to in architecture, sculpture, painting, relief, decoration, stelae, jewelry, personal possessions, and literature. Many Middle Kingdom monuments are poorly preserved, which contributes to the era's relative lack of modern prominence. Because Egyptian temples dedicated to deities were often replaced by succeeding kings, almost no Middle Kingdom temples remain standing. Many Middle Kingdom pyramids were constructed with mud brick cores that eroded after their limestone casing was removed by ancient stone robbers. So as we see with the Old Kingdom pyramids, they built them out of limestone and rock underneath it, like a lesser quality rock underneath. Middle Kingdom, I guess they were just trying to cut down costs because they would use mud brick. And though mud brick can be great, it didn't hold up. So the lack of attention to Middle Kingdom monuments is unfortunate, as this was a period of beautiful artwork rendered with great skill and sensitivity. The preceding Old Kingdom appears to have been an age of supreme confidence, at least through the scrim of 5,000 years. So looking back, it looks like they were much more full of themselves. And Middle Kingdom, they kind of have a little bit more humility. So at the end of the Old Kingdom, what happened was centralized political control disintegrated and local rulers came to the fore instead of one king of Egypt, which started the intermediate period, the first intermediate period. The collapse was perhaps the result of poor harvests caused by low Nile floods, although the reasons have been debated. Political power coalesced around two centers, Heracleopolis in the north and Thebes in the south, with the southern rulers eventually defeating the Heracleopolitans. I'm sure that there's a more Egyptian name for them. That sounds very Latinized. Or, yeah, it doesn't sound Egyptian. In some sense, where's my other? Here. I don't know what I wrote here. Anyway, basically, eventually, the Thebans defeated the Heracleopolitans and started the Middle Kingdom. So, head of Senusret III. This is from the 12th dynasty. So, if we were in class, I would ask, what do you notice about this? But we are not in class. So I'll say it. It's a much more lifelike representation than other Egyptian pharaohs we've seen. And it should be said, even though there are very tense and intense rules about Egyptian art and depiction, there are intermittent periods of realism and naturalism throughout ancient Egypt's 3 millennia of existence. Of course, not everybody was going to want to follow the codified rules. They're going to want to depict themselves differently or naturally, or yeah. So in the mid-12th dynasty, one of these realistic periods or realism periods, where the face is depicted, or the face of the pharaoh underwent a startling transformation from the youthful ideal to a mature individual. Senusret here has soft folds. He has a very prominent bone structure. He has very good cheekbones. And he has a little bit of protruding eyes, all of which are reflected in this imposing monumental work. It's not on a monumental scale, but it is a very striking work. As you can see, it's pretty actually life-size. It's only 17 inches. But so these changes must have resulted from new ideas about what kingship was and what it meant. And perhaps it manifested here as a desire to depict a king who has gained the wisdom of his age to lead Egypt, meaning he is wise enough to have a life experience. So, and Senusret is known for, or Senusret III, is known for his distinctive statues. And they're immediately recognizable to Egyptologists and art historians who study Egypt. On them, the king is depicted at different ages, and in particularly on the aged one, he sports a very somber, wizened expression. He is not a happy person. He is like, he has seen things. And it's, and also you have to think he probably was a little older here. He was probably pretty old in this because, you know, people don't realize that when we're looking at history and you see, and people say like, oh, they only lived to like 30 back then, so 15 was middle-aged. No. Plenty of people made it to their 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s. It happened all the time. What lowers that statistic is infant mortality. Throughout history, about 80% of babies born from the ancient periods to modern medicine times, 80% of those babies would die before the age of 1. So infant mortality was insanely high, and it's very sad. And people would like to impose the thought that because people were so used to babies dying, that they didn't really love their children. They didn't allow themselves to love their children. That's not true. It probably would have made for an easier grieving period. But no, people still loved their children just as much as they do today. And we can see evidence of that. But yes, infant mortality heavily impacts our statistics on life expectancy throughout history. So Senusret, when he came to the throne, was probably in his 20s or 30s at the latest. And that's pretty average for becoming a king. Your dad probably reigns for 20, 30 years. So, and you're born in that time, and then you reign for 20, 30, 40 years, and you die when you're in your 60s or 70s. So that was a very long tangent, but basically people lived the same length of time. It's just more babies died then, which is very sad. But it also kind of speaks to the fact that his ears are enormous. He has very, very large ears. Why? Probably because he's older and your ears don't really stop growing, which is really funny. Um, so he's also wearing the Nemesi's headdress that we're used to seeing. Um, and he has the uraeus, the cobra. And scholars can only really make assumptions about why he wanted to be portrayed in a more accurate way. And there's two very different opinions. Some argue that he just wanted to be represented as an old wise man, or he wanted to be depicted as a lonely and disenchanted ruler who is more human than divine. But to me, I think that's a little reachy as trying to find humanity within them when we have enough humanity to understand them, because they were human and made human choices. It's probably more likely he just wanted to be seen as an older, wise man. Okay. Sorry, I lied. Last Old Kingdom work. Oh, no, we're on the Middle Kingdom. Wow, okay. My brain is not here today. Okay, so the rock-cut tombs of Beni Hassan. So Beni Hassan is located on the eastern bank of the Nile in Egypt. It's an archaeological site that holds great significance in understanding the history of art and burial practices of ancient Egypt, and it's known for its rock-cut tombs and beautifully preserved wall paintings. It offers a window into the lives of the elite during the Middle Kingdom period. So the tombs exhibit a unique architectural style. As you can see, it's very post and lintel. And it's characterized by a sloping entrance corridor, sloping down, leading to a central pillared hall and burial chamber. Some tombs even feature multiple chambers and intricate passageways. So the wall paintings found within the tombs of Beni Hassan are true masterpieces of ancient Egyptian art. These vibrant and well-preserved frescoes provide invaluable insights into various aspects of daily life during the Middle Kingdom. The scene depicts agricultural activities, hunting expeditions, religious rituals, military campaigns, and even wrestling. The attention to detail and the use of vivid colors bring these ancient scenes to life, giving us a glimpse into the customs, occupations, and beliefs of the time. So preserving and protecting the tombs at Beni Hassan is of utmost importance to ensure their longevity. Ongoing conservation efforts aim to safeguard the structures and artworks and prevent deterioration caused by environmental factors. Archaeologists and researchers continue to study the tombs and their contents, uncovering new information about ancient Egyptian history, society, and culture. And so, yeah, you have here a man hunting and another man here who's probably going to cut papyrus down for harvest. Here you have a man hunting birds with a blow, like a blow pole, and the blow darts. Yeah, and I love this. It's wrestling poses. So I just love that some guy loved wrestling enough that he was like, yeah, this is what I need this on my tomb. So the tomb of Mekhetre. So the ancient Egyptian official Mekhetre was a treasurer and high steward during the reign of Menuhotep II, Menahotep III, and perhaps Amenemhat I in the Middle Kingdom period. So he served for a long time. possibly 40 years. He served under 3 pharaohs. His tomb is part of the Theban necropolis and lies next to a large unfinished royal tomb, which was originally attributed to King Menuhotep III, and after new research to Amenemhat the first. Therefore, Mekhetre most likely died under the latter king. So, yeah. All the accessible rooms in the tomb of Mekhetre had been robbed and plundered in antiquity. But in the early 1920s, the Met Museum's excavator, Herbert Winlock, wanted to obtain an accurate floor plan of the tomb's layout for his map of the entire necropolis in Thebes. And so he had his workmen clean out debris. So basically, Herbert wanted to make a map of every tomb that is in the Thebes necropolis, which is hundreds of tombs. And he wanted to draw out the layouts of each one on this map. So to do this, he was making sure that all of the crap and dust and stuff that was in there could be thrown out and cleaned so that he could get an accurate measurement. So it was during this cleaning operation that a small hidden chamber was discovered, and it was filled with 24 almost perfectly preserved miniature models. And eventually half of these went to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, and the other half came to the Metropolitan Museum in the partition of finds. So basically, the Egyptian Museum was like, hey, we deserve to have half of this. The Met said, that's totally fair. We're going to take half to our collection. And you can still see them. So here's one. So this is a traveling boat being rowed. So the afterlife is always open to danger. So tombs were equipped with practical items such as food, clothing, furniture, as well as relief paintings and other objects such as jewelry with protective or magical functions, figures of deities, and miniature models of buildings, servants, and soldiers. They were all designed to ensure the safety and well-being of a person through eternity. So Mekhetre is shown here, seated, sniffing a lotus blossom, while with a lookout on the bow. And I love this lookout. He has a little lantern. So if they're rowing at night, he can see what's going on in front of them. And there's a singer here, and I guess in this little structure on the boat, there's a harpist singing. So he is being serenaded, like a gondolier, on his boat. And there's 12 oarsmen that are helping helping propel the boat, and this man is in charge of steering. And this boat is very accurate to what ancient Egyptian boats were, and possibly one that Mekhetre owned himself. And it may be literal, and it also may be symbolic of him traveling to the afterlife. This is a model of a granary, which is basically they make flour, or they collect the grain to be partitioned by companies to buy. So a granary, these are people taking stock. These are people literally making flour. There might be one of them that is a scribe that is writing down like how much is being made. And then these people have bags of grain or flour, and they're climbing up and they're putting it in the correct area to throw it in and then collect later. So back then, grain was used for a whole slew of different things. You use it for bread, you use it for alcohol, you use it for mainly bread and alcohol, which are very important things, at least to the ancient Egyptians. They made a lot of beer, and they loved beer. They talk about it all the time. Yeah, beer was very valuable. So these people are, this somebody owns a granary business. And now Mokhetre has his own granary. This is a model of a baker and a brewer. So we have somebody who's using the flour. So these people are making the flour, and then these people are making the bread. These people are making beer. So Mokhetre will always have bread and beer in the afterlife. And here you can see they're so cute. Here are ladies making flour, literally making flour, and here's a man shaping the bread, and here is a man who's cooking the bread. Unfortunately, my little bubble here is in the way, but these people are mashing the grain to put into a vessel that's down here and with water, and eventually the fermentation process will happen, where they'll have beer. Okay, this is probably my favorite. I love this one. This is a model house and garden, or a model of a terrace and garden. So in the center of the garden, we can't really see it, is a pond surrounded by sycamore fig trees with red fruit growing from the trunks and branches. The pond is lined with copper and could have been filled with water at some point, like actually filled with water. Facing the garden is a porch of a house. There's 2 rows of columns that support the roof, made of palm trunks split into halves. So as you can see here, just like we have today, you have to have support beams. So they made them out of palm tree. The rear columns have capitals in the form of papyrus stalks bound together, and the capitals of the front columns imitate bundles of lotus blossoms. So rainfall is very rare in Egypt, but such an eventuality is provided for in the 3 projecting spouts. I'm sorry, never mind. These are not the support beams. These are spouts for rainwater. So at the back of the portico are 2 doors and a latticed window. These are depicted in more detail also on the outside of the model. The garden model is in essence a libation basin or a pool with associated vegetation and architecture. So there may be links with the so-called soul houses or clay models of houses with representations of offerings in the forecourts. So basically, they're showing that this could be his little house or part of his little house in the afterlife. It's just very interesting to see that even back then they had like gated back gardens or back patios. And also very interesting to see how rainwater would be collected and then would provide for the plants that were in their backyards. And then lastly, this is a statuette of an offering bearer. This tall, slender woman was discovered in the hidden chamber of Metkare, and she personifies an estate that would have provided food offerings for Mokhetre's spirit in perpetuity. So she's there to serve him. She's a servant of his. So, the New Kingdom, my favorite. So late in the second intermediate period, so there was the first intermediate period, the Middle Kingdom, the second intermediate period, the New Kingdom. The Theban rulers, which was Dynasty 17, began to drive the Hyksos kings, which was Dynasty 15, from the Delta, or the Nile Delta. This was finally accomplished by Ahmose the First, who reunited Egypt, ushering in the New Kingdom, the third great era of Egyptian culture. Ahmose's successors in Dynasty 18 conducted military campaigns that expanded Egypt's influence in the Near East and established Egyptian control of Nubia to the Fourth Cataract, meaning basically they now completely controlled Nubia. As a result, the New Kingdom pharaohs commanded unimaginable wealth, much of which they lavished on their gods, especially Amun-Ra of Thebes, whose cult temple at Karnak was augmented by succeeding generations of rulers, filled with votive statues commissioned by kings and courtiers alike. They're known especially for monumental architecture and statuary honoring the gods and pharaohs. The New Kingdom, a period of nearly 500 years of political stability and economic prosperity, also produced an abundance of artistic masterpieces created for those by non-royal individuals. Okay. So, the Temple of Amun-Ra in Karnak. So, early temples were much more simple. They took the form of a house or a rectangular flat roof building made of mud brick, but clearly the great temple complexes of the New Kingdom were much more elaborate. The massive temple complex of Karnak was the principal religious center of the god Amun-Ra in Thebes during the New Kingdom. The complex remains one of the largest religious complexes in the world. However, Karnak was not just one temple dedicated to one god. It held not only the main precinct to the god Amun-Ra, but also the precinct of the gods Mut and Montu. Compared to other temple compounds that survive from ancient Egypt, Karnak is in pretty poor state now, but it still gives scholars a wealth of information about Egyptian religion and art. The site was first developed during the Middle Kingdom and was modest in scale, but as new importance was placed on the city of Thebes, subsequent pharaohs began to place their own marks on Karnak. The main precinct alone would eventually have as many as 20 temples and chapels. Karnak was known in ancient times as the most select of places, or Ipet Isut, and was not only the location of the cult image of Amun and a place for the god to dwell on earth, but also a working estate for the priestly community who lived on site. Additionally, buildings included a sacred lake, which you can see here, kitchens and workshops for the production of religious items. So the main temple of Amun-Ra had two axes. So, like XY axes. So X, Y. One that went north to south, and the other that extended east/west. The southern axis continued towards the temple of Luxor, and was connected by an avenue of ram-headed sphinxes, as you can see here. Common people could enter the temples only as far as the hypostyle halls, which were covered with inscriptions and images of the pharaoh and the gods. In the sanctuary, a priest washed the god's statue every morning, clothed it with a new garment, and provided it with food. So one of the greatest architectural marvels at Karnak is the hypostyle hall, which are also called parnaos, but I just call them hypostyle halls. which is a space with a roof supported by columns. So the hall has 134 massive sandstone columns, with the center 12 columns standing at 69 feet. Nice. Like most of the temple decoration, the hall would have been brightly painted, and some of this paint still exists on the upper parts. As you can see here, these are the smaller ones. With the center of the hall taller than the spaces on either side, the Egyptians allowed for clerestory lighting, a section of wall that allowed light and air into the otherwise dark space below. What is a clerestory? Because that doesn't really describe what a clerestory is. It's this part. So these columns are shorter, these columns are taller, but they both have to have roofs. So the roofs are connected by this wall, but the wall has windows in it to allow airflow and light, etc. That's what a clerestory is. We will talk about them a lot when we start talking about churches. So, okay, Hatshepsut with offering jars. So on the upper terrace of Hatshepsut's mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, which we'll talk about, the central sanctuary was dedicated to the god Amun-Ra, whose principal place of worship was the Karnak temple across the Nile from the mortuary temple. During a yearly festival called the Beautiful Feast of the Valley, the god's image was transported across the river to the west bank, carrying the god in his sacred the barge, I should say. The festival procession followed a roadway lined with sphinxes that led to Hatshepsut's temple. On the middle terrace, the pathway was flanked by colossal kneeling statues that represented Hatshepsut as the ideal Egyptian king, a young man in the prime of his life. So, some of the statues were depicted wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt. Others, like this one, wear the Nemsi's headcloth. Hatshepsut also wears the false beard and shendit kilt that are part of the regalia of a king. On the side of the face, it's possible to see the strap that would have held the false beard in place. We can't really see it here. I couldn't find a great picture of the face. The inscription on this statue indicates that Hatshepsut is offering Amun Ma'at, or the order, or basically Amun as the goddess Ma'at, who is, Amun Ma'at. Ma'at means truth and justice. There is a goddess of truth and justice named Ma'at, but this is Amun as Amun Ma'at. There are different personalities and archetypes to each god. We'll see this in ancient Greece too. So by making this offering, Hatshepsut affirms that Ma'at is the guiding principle of her reign. Yes, her reign, because Hatshepsut was a female pharaoh. She was the daughter of Thutmose I and his great wife Ahmose. Thutmose I also fathered Hatshepsut's husband, Thutmose II, by his secondary wife, Mutnofret. So Hatshepsut and Thutmose II had a daughter, Neferu-Ra, while Thutmose II fathered a son with his lesser wife, Iset, Thutmose III. So Hatshepsut, this lady here, who is depicting herself as a man, was married to her half-brother, and they had a daughter. And she was the lead wife, the great wife to her half-brother. Her half-brother also was married to another woman named Iset, and she had a son with him named Thutmose III, because they have no creativity. And Neferu-Re, her daughter, Hatshepsut's daughter, and Thutmose III would eventually get married, and they would continue the family line. So Thutmose II, though, Hatshepsut's husband, died while his son was still a child, and so Hatshepsut became regent, which is basically the person that rules for the a child ruler, because they are a child and are not even of legal age to drink. Obviously, they probably drank as children in Egypt, but my point is that they would not have the intelligence to reign a country. They are still learning their alphabet. So Hatshepsut comes in, says, I'm going to take care of things. But in the 7th year of her regency, she broke with tradition and had herself crowned as Pharaoh of Egypt. Her reign was one of the most prosperous and peaceful in Egypt's history. Her time as pharaoh is characterized by successful trade, a booming economy, and her many public works projects that employed laborers from across the nation. So you think, wow, these people were super selfish. They were really self-absorbed. Yeah, they were, but they also knew that they were incredibly wealthy, that they had so much money, and they would be doing a disservice to their people if they weren't paying them to do something. So what else would they make them do besides build monuments to themselves? It's a win-win situation. And here's that mortuary temple that we were talking about. This is where Hatshepsut with jars was. So among the duties of an Egyptian monarch was the construction of monumental building projects to honor the gods and preserve the memory of their reigns for eternity. These building projects were not just some grandiose gesture on the part of the king to appease the god or the ego, but were central to the foundation and development of a unified state. Among the colossal building efforts, the mortuary temple of Pharaoh Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahari stands out as one of the most impressive. She commissioned her mortuary temple soon after coming to power in 1479 BCE and had it based on the mortuary temple of Mentuhotep II, who was a powerful king from the first dynasty. She wanted it to tell the story of her life and reign and surpass any other built before or after. The temple was designed by Hatshepsut's steward and confidant Senenmut, who also was a tutor to Neferu-Ra, her daughter, and possibly Hatshepsut's lover. I could not put it in here because I did not have time. Please look up the graffiti of Hatshepsut and Senenmut that is at the mortuary temple. Very salacious. So the king would not actually be buried in this complex. When I say king, I mean Hatshepsut, because she took on the title pharaoh, which means king. So she was a king. So she was not buried in this temple. She was buried in a rock-cut tomb cut into the roof of the rock of the cliffs behind it. The entire structure was designed to blend organically with the surrounding landscape and towering cliffs, which is just absolutely stunning. Walking through the first courtyard on the ground level, one could go directly through the archways on either side, which led down alleys to small ramps to the second level. You can't see them anymore. I don't have them. Or stroll up the central ramp whose entrance was flanked by statues of lions. On the second level, there were 2 reflecting pools here and here. And appropriately, 2 reflecting pools and sphinxes lining the pathway to another ramp, which brought the visitor up to the 3rd level. The 1st, 2nd, and 3rd levels of the temple all feature colonnades of elaborate reliefs, paintings, and statuary. The 2nd courtyard would house the tomb of Senenmut to the right of the ramp leading up to the 3rd level. So he would have been buried around here, which is an appropriately opulent tomb placed beneath the 2nd courtyard with no outward features, so it preserved the symmetry of the space. On the right of the colonnaded ramp, on the right side of the ramp leading to the third level was the birth colonnade. The birth colonnade told the story of Hatshepsut's divine creation with Amun as her true father. Hatshepsut had the night of her conception inscribed on the walls, relating how the god came to impregnate her mother. And it reads, he, Amun, in the incarnation of the majesty of her husband, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Thutmose I, found her sleeping in the beauty of her palace. She awoke at the divine fragrance and turned towards his majesty. He went to her immediately. He was aroused by her, and he imposed his desire upon her. He allowed her to see him in his form of a god, and she rejoiced at the sight of his beauty after he had come before her. His love passed into her body. The palace was flooded with divine fragrance. So, woo! Anyway, basically, this is her conception story and birth story. The actual inscriptions themselves are heavily destroyed. Thutmose III, the boy king that she was supposed to be regent for, basically had her memory wiped from history. He defaced many of her statues and her inscriptions and undid a lot of what she decreed, and he clearly did not have a good relationship with his stepmother. And that's that practice that I mentioned of damnato memoriae, or memoriae, where we remember to forget this person. They are not worthy of our remembrance. So let me go through it a little bit. These are all the gods, or the major gods, in front of Amun on his throne. And they're all conversing with him, saying, hey, you should create a daughter with this queen of Egypt, so that we can have this divine authority on earth. And Amun is like, great. So Thoth, the god of wisdom, is walking with Amun here to the bedroom of Hatshepsut's mom. Hold on. What is Hatshepsut's mom's name? I forget. Ahmose. So here he is walking to her bedroom. Here, Ahmose is sitting right here, and Amun is sitting here, and he's holding an ankh, which is that kind of cross shape that you see a lot in ancient Egyptian art. Let me show you. I'll draw it. And he's holding it to her lips, which is the breath of life. So the ankh is a representation of the breath of life. That's an ankh. And he's holding it to her lips. So this is him impregnating her. This is Amun now going to the god of creation. I forget his name. But he basically creates souls on a potter's wheel. So at the bottom here is a potter's wheel, and this is the name and titles of Hatshepsut. So he is creating her. And here is Hatshepsut having the life, Amun sitting here, her little body here, and this goddess Heket, who is a goddess of life and childbirth, who has a frog head, is breathing life into Hatshepsut. Here is the god of creation, and I forget which, the god of creation, Amos, and Heket walking together to have her give birth. And you can see, it's very funny. The only sign that she's pregnant is this tiny little bump. I mean, usually they have tiny little bumps, but this is a real, like, this is only slightly larger than the women who are not pregnant. And here, Hatshepsut is being born as her mother sits on a birthing chair, which, yes, it's basically a toilet seat. If you imagine a toilet, it just is a chair with a hole in it, which is actually probably much more comfortable than giving birth lying down. So here she's being born with attendants attending her mom to make sure that everything's going okay. Here are gods underneath her, and then more gods underneath that, and the goddess Hathor, who is another goddess of childbirth, attending the birth. So, Akhenaten, what a man. I once had a friend say, Akhenaten was a gem of society. I don't know if the Egyptians would agree with that, or at least the ancient Egyptians would have definitely not agreed with that, but we'll talk about it. So Akhenaten was born Amenhotep to Pharaoh Amenhotep III. Again, they had no creativity. And to his principal wife, Queen Tai. So Amenhotep III is his dad, Queen Tai is his mother. And she was the daughter of a wealthy landowner and noble. So she was not his Amenhotep III's sister. Thank God we don't have a sister marriage here, except by Akhenaten or Amenhotep the fourth. So in the second or third year of his reign, Akhenaten was first known as Amenhotep IV because his dad was Amenhotep III. And in his second or third year of his own reign, he started introducing a radical new religious practice of worshiping only the sun disk of Ra, called the Aten. So if you look at a sculpture or a relief of Ra, the god Ra, he usually has the sun on his head. This is worship. He is suggesting we only worship the sun disk on Ra's head. Okay. In the fourth year of his reign, he moved the capital city of ancient Egypt from Thebes to Amarna, which is miles and miles and miles away. It is very far. By the ninth year of his reign, he changed his name to Akhenaten, meaning one who is effective on behalf of the Aten. And this was as insane as it sounds. This is crazy to do. He broke with pretty much every single tradition of his culture. He was like, forget all the other gods, they're not as important. The Aten is where it's at. We're only going to worship him or it. It didn't really even have a gender. It radically just transformed the political, spiritual, and cultural life of the country. It also changed the artistic standard of the time, where Akhenaten wanted the art of Egypt to be more lifelike and display organic lines rather than the regimented static shapes we're used to seeing. The pharaoh is depicted with a distorted physique with protruding stomach. You can barely see it, but he has a tummy, very thin arms, and exaggerated facial features, such as a long nose and pointed chin. One statue in particular has been the subject of a lot of debate because it shows him pretty much nude without genitalia. So everybody's like, what's that about? We know that he had kids with multiple women, so why is he depicting himself as genderless? look, look everywhere to believe that trans people don't exist or that they are a new thing. Obviously, they're not. But also, he is so radical about it as to depict himself that way when it goes against every single tradition of the time. It's odd. So the colossi of Akhenaten, meaning he had hundreds of these huge statues of himself. This is 13 feet high. There are some that are taller than that and are much taller than that, like twice that size. And they're discovered accidentally in 1925, the same year my grandmother was born, RIP, in a drainage ditch that was being dug east of the enclosure wall of the Great Temple of Amun in Karnak. So remember the temple at Karnak. And they'd been left there purposefully shortly after his reign. Yeah, he's an interesting one. But you'll definitely have heard of his wife, Nefertiti. So Nefertiti, meaning the beautiful one has come forth, which, what a beautiful name, was the 14th century BCE great royal wife of Akhenaten, as well as the divine priestess to the Aten, as designated by her husband. Little is known about Nefertiti. Theories suggest she could have been an Egyptian royal by birth, a foreign princess, or the daughter of a government official named Ai, or who became pharaoh after Akhenaten's son Tutankhamun. So we're not 100% sure who she was before her name became Nefertiti, or who her parents were. So Nefertiti, though, bore 6 daughters to Akhenaten, one of whom, Ankhesenpa'aten, or she was renamed to Ankhesenamun after the destruction of the Aten cult after the death of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. So Ankhesenpa'aten, or Ankhesenamun, their daughter, married Tutankhamun, her half-brother. So we'll go into the family tree so that you're not as terribly confused. I only go into it because I find the royal family and lineage very fascinating because I'm a huge nerd. So the bust of Nefertiti is believed to have been crafted around 1345 BCE by the sculptor Thutmose. So we do have a name. The bust does not have any inscriptions, but can certainly be identified as Nefertiti by the characteristic crown, which she wears in other surviving and clearly labeled depictions. So no one else, or at least no woman, is depicted with, sorry, I keep looking outside. I'm seeing if it's going to start storming soon. No other woman really wears this crown, and then nobody really wears it after. So it's very unique. So the bust is 19 inches tall and weighs about 44 pounds. It's made of a limestone core covered and painted with stucco layers. The face is completely symmetrical and almost intact, but the left eye lacks inlay that is present in the right. The iris of the eye is of inserted quartz with black paint and is fixed with beeswax. The background of the eye socket is unadorned limestone. Nefertiti wears her characteristic blue crown, known as the Nefertiti cap crown, with a golden diadem band looped around the horizontal ribbons and joining at the back. There would have been a Uraeus cobra, but it's fallen off. And it's now broken. She also wears a broad collar with a floral pattern, and unfortunately also the ears have suffered damage. Sorry, my cat is here. Hopefully I can get her to come up and say hello. According to some historians, the bust reflects the classical Egyptian art style. I don't know if I agree with that, which deviates from the eccentricities of the Amarna art style, which the Amarna art style is Akhenaten's art style that he ushered in. And the exact function of the bust is unknown, though it's thought it could be used as a model to be used for other official portraits, and it was possibly kept in the artist's workshop. So chemical analysis was done on the paints, and the results were published in the book Portrait of Queen Nefertiti in 1923. So the blue would have been made of powdered frit, which is a pigment that we call Egyptian blue. And it's made of quartz, lime, and colored with copper oxide, or the green that copper becomes when exposed to the air. So think the color of the Statue of Liberty. The skin color, oh, here she comes. Oh, George. Okay, goodbye. So the skin color is a fine powdered lime spar colored with red chalk or iron oxide. So it's basically lime, which is a very paste-like substance mixed with iron oxide. The yellow is orpiment, which is one of my favorite words. Or arsenic sulfide, so arsenic. Green, the green is powdered frit colored with copper and iron oxide. So again, that Egyptian blue color mixed with others. The black is coal with beeswax as a binding medium, and the white is chalk. Akhenaten and his family. So the famous altar relief from a house in Amarna shows Akhenaten with his wife, Nefertiti, and three of their daughters of the solar disk. Three of their daughters, 1, 2, 3, and the solar disk of Aten. The tips of the sun's rays are shown as hands, extending symbols of life towards the royal couple. So some of them are holding ankhs. The features of both the king and queen have been drawn in the new exaggerated style, which is another extreme break with tradition. Another extreme break with tradition is the representation of the daughters with heads that are elongated at the back as a manifestation of the life-giving power of the sun god. This is not an indication that they are aliens, okay? Because there's ancient astronaut freaking theorists believe that they are part alien because Akhenaten was so odd that he must have been alien and he had these dreams. And he actually had epilepsy. So no, he didn't have like visions given to him by aliens. He had a condition. But anyway, this representation, together with the character-like overdrawing of the faces, is purely stylistic, and it's not an indication of hereditary or intentionally produced deformities that's caused by head wrapping. So cultures all over the world use head wrapping as a form of bodily modification in babies. So in Africa, in some places, they make their heads go back like this, similarly to this. Some in Mongolia, I believe, made their skulls pointier, or maybe in Peru they made their heads pointier, and then in Native American cultures, because of the baby boards that they were on, like the papoose, their heads at the back would be very flat, which they thought looked better. So yeah, but this was not the only like thing that people had to that this family had to worry about. They had enough to worry about besides the elongated heads, which are not actually like of that time. Nobody had their heads like that we know of. But everybody was related, as I've talked about. So if we look back, so here's Hatshepsut. Her father was Thutmose the First. Ahmose was the daughter of another pharaoh and his mother. And he was also and Thutmose, her father, was probably also related to her mother. Hatshepsut marries Thutmose II, has Neferure. Thutmose is married to Iset. They have Thutmose III. Neferure and Thutmose get married. They have children. But he also married another woman named Meritre Hatshepsut, who was probably named after his mother-in-law slash stepmom. So they had children. They had children who married their brother and sister. So they had a daughter named Iset and Thutmose the Fourth and Amenhotep III. Queen Tai, she brings in new blood, thank God. And Thuya and Yuya are her parents, which they're over here. These are their mummies. Yuya is looking great, and so is Thuya, but Yuya is really actually recognizable. Like, wow, they did a great job with him. Tai, what a boss. She has Amenhotep IV or Akhenaten, and then Nefertiti. We don't know exactly who she was. If she was Ai's daughter, then she would be definitely a first cousin, at least, of her husband. And it also should be said that Kia, who is believed to be the mother of Tutankhamun, was Amenhotep's the Fourth or Akhenaten, his full sister, which led to, and I should also say that Tutankhamun married his half-sister, like I said, Ankhesenamun, and they had 2 children that did not survive infancy and were buried with Ankhesenamun in her tomb. But anyway, all of this led to Tut being fucked. Very genetically screwed over. He had temporal lobe epilepsy, which gives very intense grand mal seizures that can kill you. And he also had a very intense overbite. He had gynecomastia, which is breast and hip tissue growth in males. It's probable that he got this from his father, because if you look at depictions of Akhenaten / Amenhotep IV, his dad, he does have that feminine frame, and you're like, that's a little weird, but it makes sense if he wanted to be depicted accurately, and he had this condition, which he probably gave to his son. He also had kyphosis, which is a hunchback, so he was bent forward, he had a hunchback. He also had scoliosis, which is curvature of the spine, which means he was not only bent forward, his spine was also squiggly. And he also had a clubfoot. So the poor guy was really, really inbred and messed up. It is horrifying that this poor guy had to live like this. And he died young. He died at like 18 or 19, and it's no wonder, because people are not meant to be this inbred. Yeah. So, the death mask of Tutankhamun. So, the priesthood of Amun quickly regained its former power after the death of Akhenaten. It's important to know that Akhenaten could have also taken over or changed the religion because he wanted to take all the wealth from the temple of Amun at Karnak. And they were loaded. So it's very possible that that was part of his plan. His son changed his name from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun, Tutankhamun, which means the living image of Amun. And he died young at 18 or 19 and was buried in the Valley of the Kings. So the mask is 21 inches tall, 15 inches wide, and 19 inches deep. It's fashioned from 2 layers of high carat gold and weighs 22.6 pounds. The face represents the pharaoh's standard image, and the same image was found by excavators elsewhere in the tomb. He wears a Nemsi's headcloth, topped by the royal insignia of a cobra and vulture, symbolizing Tutankhamun's rule of both Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt, respectively. The ears are pierced to hold earrings, a feature that appears to have been reserved for queens and children in almost all surviving ancient Egyptian works of art, which some people say that this was originally meant for a woman. Probably not. It's probably meant for a man, because the men wore earrings too back then. And we have evidence of that because we have their mummies, and we can see that they had pierced ears. So the mask is inlaid with colored glass and gemstones, including lapis lazuli, which are the eye surrounds and eyebrows, quartz in the eyes, obsidian, which is the pupils, carnelian, amazonite, turquoise, and faience. I've never heard of that stone before in my life. When it was discovered in 1925, the 5.5 narrow gold beard had become separated from the mask, but it was reattached to the chin using a wooden dowel in 1944. This next part is very funny. So in August 2014, the beard fell off when the mask was taken out of its display case for cleaning. The museum workers responsible used quick-drying epoxy in an attempt to fix it, leaving the beard off-center. So not only did they try to do a patch job, but they did a bad patch job. And the damage was noticed in January of 2015, so they didn't get away with it for long. It was 5 months, which is a long time, but I mean, still probably somebody who had been on a sabbatical or something came in and was like, who fucked up? And it's been repaired since by a German-Egyptian team who reattached it using beeswax, which is a natural material used by ancient Egyptians. It's just very funny. Oh, God. It's like Mr. Magoo level fuck up. It's hysterical. This is the innermost coffin of Tutankhamun. So the mask would have gone directly over his wrapped body. Then he would have gone inside this coffin, and then all the subsequent coffins. His tomb was one of the rare examples of a tomb that wasn't plundered. And we don't know exactly why it wasn't. It was discovered in 1925, again, the year my grandmother was born, R.I.P. We don't know why it wasn't discovered, besides the fact that it's actually pretty small. And it's possible that his tomb, was actually meant for somebody else. And he died suddenly, and they were like, oh fuck, we need to find a place to put him. And so they put him in somebody else's tomb that was meant for him. And the reason why they also believe that is because these paintings are very large compared to other paintings in tombs. Like incredibly large. It's unusual. Like almost like pretty much life-sized. Also, there's mold on the wall. As you can see, all of this is not just that it's dirty. It's foxing, what in art history we call foxing. and that's if you look on at like an old book and open it and you see those like brown spots, that's mold and it's called foxing and it's impossible to remove. You can't get rid of it. So they realized that the paint was still wet when they sealed the tomb. So nobody could, so it created a moist environment to grow mold. Yeah, but here's his here's the layout of the tomb. This is his treasury. Of course, my freaking head is in front of it, but this is the treasury. This is his burial chamber. This is the only part that's painted. Everything else was left unpainted, which usually the entire tomb is painted. So here's a map. We're about to talk about Abu Simbel. I forget where it is. Where is it? Abu Simbel. I don't know. I forget where it is. Anyway. So, during his reign, Ramses II embarked on an extensive building program throughout Egypt and Nubia, which Egypt by now controlled. So Nubia was very important to the Egyptians because it was a source of gold and many other precious trade goods. He therefore built several grand temples there in order to impress upon the Nubians that Egyptians might and Egyptianize the people of Nubia. So the most prominent temples are the rock-cut tombs near the modern village of Abu Simbel, at the Second Nile Cataract, the border between Lower Nubia and Upper Nubia. So there are two temples, the Great Temple dedicated to Ramses II himself, and the small temple dedicated to his chief wife, Queen Nefertari. The complex took about 20 years to build and was completed around year 24 of his reign, which corresponds to 1265 BCE, so about 100 years after Akhenaten and his son Tutankhamun ruled. The statue to the immediate left of the entrance was damaged in an earthquake, causing the head and torso to fall away. These fallen pieces were not restored to the statue during the relocation, which we'll talk about, but placed at the statue's feet in the positions it was originally found. So next to Ramses' legs are a number of other smaller statues, so you can all see them here. And none are higher than the knees of the pharaoh, meaning they're not as important as him, clearly, but they're still important. And they display his chief wife, Nefertari, his mother, Queen Muttoi, his first two sons, Amun, Amun-Her Khepesheth, and Prince Ramses. And then his first six daughters, Bintanath, Baketmut, Nefertari, wonder where they got that name, Merit Amen, Baketmut, Nefertari, Merit Amen, Nebetowi, and Iset Nofret. I should say that Ramses II, he lived into his 90s, and he had anywhere from 88 to 100 children. So the man, there's no way he could have depicted all of them. Oh, could you imagine? Anyway. So the facade of the colossi are 108 feet high and 125 feet wide. It carries a frieze depicting 22 baboons worshipping at the rising sun, with upraised arms, and a stela somewhere recording the marriage of Ramses to a daughter of King Hattusili III, and her name was Ma'at Hor Neferu Re, which sealed the peace between Egypt and the Hittites. I wish I could know where this stela is. I don't know. The entrance doorway itself is surmounted by bas-relief images of the king worshiping the falcon-headed Ra, Horakti, which is another personality of the god Ra. Ra holds the hieroglyph Usur and a feather in his right hand, with Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice, to his left. In his left. This is a cryptogram for Ramses II's throne named Usur Ma'at Re. I'm sorry, Usur Ma'at Ra. So with the passage of time, the temples fell into disuse, and the Great Temple eventually became mostly covered by a sand dune. By the 6th century BCE, the sand already covered the statues of the main temple up to their knees. And the temple was excavated in the 1800s by an Italian archaeologist and a Swiss archaeologist. So the Temple of Ramses II were not funerary monuments like the pyramids. The royal tombs at this time are in the valleys of the kings and the queens. The son of Ra, Ramses means son of Ra, so the whole temple is dedicated to him and Ra. And his second name means Mary Amun, is Mary Amun, which means beloved of Amun. So his name is son of Ra, beloved of Amun. And the inscription from an obelisk in the area says, "As long as the skies exist, your monuments shall exist, your name shall exist, firm as the skies." Okay, so inside the temple are 8 23-foot statues of the god Osiris with the face of the god king Ramses to further proclaim his divinity. It is a large temple structure built into the mountain, or so how they moved the inner part, I won't ever know, because that's a lot of fucking work. So the colossal statues on the left hand wall bear the white crown of Upper Egypt, while those on the opposite wear the double crown of Lower and Upper Egypt. They depict Upper Egypt because that's where it is. It's in southern Egypt, which is Upper Egypt. You know, they have to make it confusing. So that's why. There's a hypostyle hall in there. There's depictions of Ramses and Nefertari with the sacred boats of Amun and Ra Horakti. And it's very intense. But there's also, the temple is on an axis positioned by the architects who designed it, so that on October 22nd and February 22nd, the rays of the sun would penetrate the sanctuary and illuminate the sculptures on the back wall, except for the statue of Ptah, who is the god connected to the realm of the dead. So he always remains in the dark. So therefore he can't be lit up. It's very interesting. So on the back wall there are sculptures of the god of gods, and all of them there's the gods Amun, Ra, and Ptah, and Ptah is always in darkness. And people gather at Abu Simbel on these days to witness this, just like at Stonehenge in England and Newgrange in Ireland. So the relocation of it, in 1959, an international donations campaign to save the monuments of Nubia began. The southernmost relics of this ancient civilization were under threat from the rising waters of the Nile that were about to result in the construction of the Aswan High Dam. So the salvage of the Abu Simbel temple began in 1964 by a multinational team of archaeologists, engineers, and skilled heavy equipment operators working together under the UNESCO banner. It cost about $40 million at the time, so that's equal to around $392.96 million today. And in between 1964 and 68, the entire site was carefully cut into large blocks up to 30 tons, averaging 20 tons, dismantled and lifted and reassembled in a new location 213 feet higher and 656 feet back from the river. In one of the greatest challenges of archaeological engineering in history. Some structures were even saved from under the waters of Lake Nasser. Today, a few hundred tourists visit the temples daily. So here's the temple of Ramses, and this is the temple of his wife, Nefertari. And here's what it would have looked like when it was first created. It would have been painted. And it's interesting. He's wearing a Nemzis and the crown of Upper Egypt. It's interesting. But yeah. So I'm sure you are all familiar with the Book of the Dead, or at least the words Book of the Dead. So this scene is read from left to right, just like how we read today. So to the left, Anubis, the god of mummification, brings this man, Hunefer, to the judgment area. First, I will say, this is Hunefer in life, worshiping the gods. So this is saying, hey, Hunefer was a good guy. He worshiped the gods, he did what was right, he followed all the rules. So Hunefer is being led through the first stages of death for the judgment ceremony of his soul. So Hunefer's heart is symbolized by a pot, and it's being weighed against a feather, which is the symbol of Ma'at, the goddess of law and order. So if the heart didn't balance with the feather or wasn't lighter than a feather, so the Egyptians really didn't see a point to the brain. Of course, they knew that the brain was integral to existence and life, but they didn't really know what it did. They thought your thought and your sense of moral dignity and correctness was in your heart. That's where all thought and feeling came from, not your brain. So you have to weigh your heart against law and order to see if you were a good person. And if it's lighter than the feather or weighs the same as the feather, then you were a good person and you deserve to go on and have a good afterlife. And if you were a bad person, as in your heart was heavier than the feather, then the strange the strange alligator lion hippopotamus creature would eat your heart and yourself, and you would not be allowed to have a afterlife, and you would cease to exist even in the afterlife. But as you can see, Hunefer's heart is a little bit lighter than the feather, so he's okay. And here the god Osiris, the god Horus, is bringing Hunefer to meet his father Osiris. the god of the dead, one of the gods of the dead. Meaning that he's a good person, he's made it through, he's good. And then we have Isis, his wives, Isis and Ma'at behind Osiris. I'm sorry, I should state these are Osiris's wives, Ma'at and Isis. This is another vignette from a different Book of the Dead. There are multiple Books of the Dead. Not everybody was buried with one. Mostly wealthier people were. I'm sure there were also Books of the Dead that you could buy off the street. But this one is personalized. So the original document was over 121 feet long, with spells illustrated by a series of vignettes. One of the most important scenes shows an episode in the creation of the world and centers on the god Atum as creator. This is Atum. That's the god of creation. Okay, that's Atum. Not Amun, Atum. So according to the myth, Atum created his two offspring, Tefnut, moisture, and Shu, air, by sneezing and spitting, which is funny. And they in turn gave birth to Nut, heaven, and Geb, earth. This vignette shows Nut stretched over the earth, represented by Geb, by Geb, who lies below her. She is separated by Geb from her father, Shu, who holds her up with both hands. This separation did not prevent Geb and Nut from having 4 children, who were Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. The myths surrounding these 4 deities relate to the emergence of human society. The separation of earth and sky constitutes the creation of the world. So this is basically the creation story for the ancient Egyptians, and it's actually very beautiful. A lot of incest again, but you know, that's in all the ancient stories. So yeah, that's class today, and I hope you all have a good weekend. Sorry I had to miss on Wednesday, and we'll talk on Monday.